There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. A Tuesday night, the low hum of the refrigerator, the distant siren cutting through the city's evening breath. They were the camouflage of the mundane, and you only recognize them for the fault lines they are in retrospect. When you look back and see how the entire landscape of your world tilted on that single, quiet axis. For me, that moment was not a grand declaration or a cinematic downpour. It was a bedroom doorway, a threshold between the world that was and the world that was about to be. It was the soft, almost desperate texture of four simple words. Don't go. Just stay. The words hung in the space between us, fragile as a spider's thread but strong enough to hold my entire body captive. Julian was already in his bed, a silhouette against the pale blue light of his laptop screen. He had been a fortress for weeks, impenetrable and silent, but now a fissure had appeared in the stone. His voice was rough, frayed at the edges like a well-worn sweater. He wasn't looking at me. His gaze was fixed on the shifting pixels of some forgotten spreadsheet, but his request was aimed directly at my heart. I stood there, my hand on the cool brass of the doorknob, my own room just a dozen feet down the hall, a sanctuary I had carefully constructed to protect myself from exactly this. From him. From the hope that moments like this ignited within me, a treacherous and beautiful fire I was constantly trying to extinguish. Staying was a simple proposition. I could pull the worn armchair from the corner, or even just sit on the floor, my back against the wall, until his breathing evened out into the steady rhythm of sleep. It was a request born of friendship, of the deep, uncomplicated bond we had cultivated for years. Any friend would do it. But for me, it was not simple at all. It was a choice between the careful architecture of my self-preservation and the wild, unmapped territory of my longing. Every instinct I had honed over the last 5 years screamed at me to retreat, to offer a quiet goodnight, and pull the door gently closed, preserving the boundary that kept us safe, that kept me safe. But the sound of his voice, the raw vulnerability tucked into the spaces between the words, was a current too strong to fight. It pulled me in. And in that moment, I knew, with a terrifying and absolute certainty, that if I stepped back into that room, the lines we had so carefully drawn around our friendship would dissolve, and I would be lost in the beautiful, aching expanse of what could be. I turned the knob, but I didn't pull. My fingers loosened. I let go. Julian and I had met in the way that so many people do in college, thrown together by the arbitrary logistics of institutional housing. He was my suite mate's friend from his hometown, a whirlwind of easy smiles and athletic grace who seemed to collect people effortlessly. He was a software engineering major and a star on the university's soccer team, a combination of intellectual rigor and physical confidence that felt like it belonged to a different species than my own. I was a photography student, most comfortable behind a lens, observing the world from a safe and curated distance. I lived in a world of light and shadow, of composition and quiet observation. He lived in a world of code and motion, of algorithms and the roar of a crowd. Our orbits should have been entirely separate, two planets governed by different suns. Yet, they collided. It started with small things. He'd burst into our common room after a late practice, smelling of rain-soaked grass and exertion, and find me editing photos on my laptop. He wouldn't just say hello. He'd pull up a chair, genuinely curious, asking about f-stops and shutter speeds, about what I was trying to capture in the stark black and white image of a single, skeletal tree against a winter sky. He listened with an intensity that was startling. Most people saw my photography as a hobby, a quaint artistic pursuit. Julian saw it as a language. He learned to read my moods by the subjects I was shooting. Brooding cityscapes meant I was stressed, while soft focus macros of dewy spiderwebs meant I was in a place of quiet contentment. He learned my language without me ever having to teach him. In return, I learned his. I started going to his games, not because I suddenly developed a passion for soccer, but because I was fascinated by the transformation. The easygoing, affable Julian I knew became a different person on the field, focused, fierce, a leader who communicated with a glance, a gesture, a perfectly placed pass. I would sit in the stands, my camera with its long lens feeling like a natural extension of my arm, and I would try to capture that other version of him. I have hundreds of photos from that time, frozen moments of him suspended in midair, his face a mask of fierce concentration, or the split second of pure, unadulterated joy after a goal. He was beautiful. There was no other word for it. And it was a truth I learned to acknowledge with a clinical, artistic detachment that was really just a flimsy shield for the much more complicated truth taking root in my heart. Our friendship solidified over late nights and cheap coffee. He would be wrestling with a complex coding problem, his screen a cascade of cryptic characters, and I would be in the darkroom, the acrid smell of developing chemicals clinging to my clothes, coaxing images into existence. We'd meet in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, both of us exhausted and running on fumes, and we would talk. We talked about everything and nothing. We talked about his frustrations with the coach, my anxieties about an upcoming critique, our shared dread of graduation, and the uncertain future that lay beyond it. He told me about his family, about the immense pressure from his father to succeed, to follow a secure and lucrative path. I told him about my own quieter upbringing, about my dream of one day having my work hang in a real gallery, a dream I rarely voiced aloud for fear of how fragile it sounded. He never made it sound fragile. He made it sound inevitable. It was during one of those late-night conversations, sometime in our junior year, that the shield I'd built around my heart finally shattered. He was talking about a girl, Sarah, someone he'd just started seeing. He spoke about her with a kind of bewildered admiration, a gentle warmth in his voice that I had never heard before. And as I sat there, nursing a lukewarm mug of tea, a profound and unwelcome ache bloomed in my chest. It wasn't jealousy, not in its sharp, angry form. It was a deeper, more hollow kind of sorrow. It was the sound of a door quietly, definitively closing. It was in that moment that I had to finally name the feeling I had been so carefully cropping out of the frame of our friendship. I was in love with him. The realization didn't come like a lightning strike. It was more like the slow development of a photograph in a chemical bath, an image that had been there all along, latent and invisible, gradually emerging with undeniable clarity. And with that clarity came a cold, sharp-edged fear. Julian was my best friend. He was the anchor in the often turbulent sea of my early 20s. He was the one person who saw me, truly saw me, and wasn't intimidated by my quiet nature or my artistic sensibilities. He was also, by all accounts, completely and unequivocally straight. To confess my feelings would be to detonate a bomb in the foundation of the most important relationship in my life. It would change everything, and I could not bear the thought of losing him. So, I made a choice. I took that beautiful, dangerous truth, and I buried it. I built a new room inside myself, soundproofed and locked, and I placed my feelings for him inside. I would be his friend. I would be his confidant. I would be the quiet observer, the role I knew best, and I would learn to be happy with that. For a long time, it was almost enough. After graduation, we decided to get an apartment together. It made sense on every level. We were comfortable with each other. We could split the rent in a city that was notoriously expensive, and neither of us wanted to face the daunting world of adulthood alone. I found a job assisting a commercial photographer, and Julian was immediately snapped up by a prestigious tech firm. Our lives fell into a new rhythm, one of domesticity and shared routine. We navigated grocery lists and utility bills, celebrated small victories with cheap beer, and commiserated over long workdays on our worn-out sofa. He was still with Sarah, their relationship deepening into the kind of comfortable, long-term partnership that seemed destined for marriage. I became an expert in compartmentalization. I was the supportive friend, the one who listened to him talk about anniversary plans and arguments over what color to paint their hypothetical future living room. I learned to smile and offer advice while the silent, locked room inside me grew colder and more cramped. I dated, here and there, men who were kind and interesting, men who were wrong for me in a dozen different ways. But no connection ever felt as real, as vital, as the platonic one I shared with Julian. My camera remained my truest companion, my way of processing the world, and the quiet ache in my own heart. I photographed empty swings in deserted parks, rain-streaked windows, the lonely geometry of fire escapes against brick walls. My work became more melancholic, imbued with a sense of longing that I could express through film but never through words. Julian, ever perceptive, noticed the shift. He'd look over my contact sheets and say, "Your stuff is getting really powerful, Leo. But it's also sad." He would say it with a furrow in his brow, a genuine concern that made the lock on that hidden room rattle in its frame. I would just shrug and say something vague about artistic expression, and he would let it go, respecting the boundaries I had so carefully erected. The shift, when it came, was not gradual. It was a seismic event. Julian and Sarah broke up. It was a messy, painful unraveling that had been happening in slow motion for months, but culminated in a single, explosive week. I came home one evening to find Julian sitting on the kitchen floor, surrounded by the contents of a cardboard box, framed photos, ticket stubs, a collection of small, meaningless objects that, when woven together, had formed the tapestry of a 4-year relationship. He wasn't crying. He was just staring, his face pale and hollowed out, as if he'd been scooped clean of all emotion. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a kind of bewildered emptiness, and said, "She's gone." She took the cat. It was such a strange, absurd detail, but it was the one that broke him. He finally put his head in his hands and began to sob, not with loud, theatrical grief, but with quiet, body-racking shudders that seemed to emanate from the very core of his being. I didn't know what to do. All my carefully constructed walls, my rules of engagement, felt useless in the face of such raw, unfiltered pain. I slid down to the floor beside him, my back against the cool kitchen cabinets, and I just sat there. I didn't offer platitudes or easy reassurances. I just offered my presence, a solid, unmoving point in his spinning world. Eventually, the sobs subsided, replaced by a ragged, exhausted silence. We sat like that for what felt like hours, the city lights beginning to bloom in the window behind us. It wasn't just the end of a relationship. I could see that now. It was the collapse of a future he had meticulously planned. The secure path his father had always championed, the one that led to a wife and a mortgage and a life of predictable stability, had crumbled into dust at his feet. He was adrift, and he was terrified. That night was the first time he asked me to stay. He had retreated to his room, and I was about to go to mine when he called my name from his doorway. His voice was thin, fragile. "Leo, can you just hang out for a bit? I don't want to be alone." I hesitated for only a second before nodding. I brought in the worn-out armchair from the living room, the one with the faded floral pattern, and settled into it. He climbed into bed, fully clothed, and pulled the covers up to his chin. We didn't talk. I just sat there, listening to the sound of his unsteady breathing in the dark, until it finally deepened into the shallow, fitful sleep of the heartbroken. I stayed until the first gray light of dawn began to seep through the blinds, and then I slipped out, my own body aching with a strange combination of exhaustion and a feeling I couldn't quite name. It felt like purpose. The breakup was the catalyst, the external crisis that sent a shockwave through the stable ground of our friendship. Julian, who had always been the confident one, the one with the clear 5-year plan, was suddenly untethered. He functioned on autopilot, going to work, eating when I put food in front of him, responding to direct questions, but the light in his eyes had dimmed. He was like a house where all the furniture was still in place, but the power had been cut. His usual social circle, the network of friends he and Sarah had shared, became a minefield of awkward sympathies and painful reminders. He withdrew from them, from everyone, except me. I became his anchor, his entire support system. The nights were the worst for him. The silence of his room, which had once been a shared space filled with her presence, became an oppressive, echoing void. The armchair vigil became a regular occurrence. He never had to ask again. It just became an unspoken understanding. Around 11, I would finish whatever I was doing and find him already in his room, the door left pointedly ajar. It was an invitation, a silent plea. I would go in, pull the chair to the side of his bed, and open my book or my laptop. Sometimes we would talk, quiet, meandering conversations about nothing of consequence. More often, we existed in a shared silence. The only sounds the rustle of a page turning or the soft click of my keyboard. He told me once, his voice muffled by his pillow, that my presence was like white noise, a steady, calming hum that drowned out the frantic monologue of his own thoughts. He said he slept better when I was there, that the nightmares were less frequent. I was a human sedative, a living dream catcher, and I accepted the role without question because it was the only way I knew how to help him. I told myself it was just what any good friend would do. It was a lie, of course, a necessary fiction I clung to like a life raft. The ritual began to evolve, slowly, almost imperceptibly. One night, after a particularly grueling week at his job, he was more restless than usual. He kept tossing and turning, the sheets twisting around him like ropes. "I can't get comfortable," he muttered into the darkness, his voice thick with frustration. A long pause followed, filled with the sound of his agitated movements. Then, quietly, "The chair looks really uncomfortable. You don't have to, you know. You could just sit on the bed." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was a new threshold, a line I had been careful not to approach. The armchair provided a necessary mode, a physical boundary that mirrored the emotional one I was so desperate to maintain. But his voice was so tired, so defeated. To refuse felt cruel. "Okay," I whispered, my own voice barely audible. I closed my laptop and moved to the edge of his queen-sized bed, perching on it stiffly, my back against the headboard, trying to take up as little space as possible. The change in proximity was electric. I was acutely aware of the heat radiating from his body, the subtle dip in the mattress from his weight, the scent of his shampoo on the pillow. He sighed, a long, deep exhalation that sounded like relief, and within minutes, his tossing and turning ceased. He was still. He was asleep. I, on the other hand, was wide awake, every nerve ending firing. I stayed there for hours, rigid and unmoving, until my muscles screamed in protest. It was the most exquisitely torturous night of my life. From then on, the armchair was retired. My spot was on the bed, propped up against the headboard with a book, a silent sentinel watching over his sleep. We never spoke of the change. It simply became the new normal. The space between us on the mattress, which had initially felt like a vast and dangerous chasm, began to shrink. It happened in increments. A night when he shifted in his sleep and his hand brushed against my leg. A morning when I woke up, having dozed off against the headboard, to find that he had thrown an arm across his body and his fingers were resting just inches from my own. Each accidental touch was a small explosion in the quiet landscape of our nights. I would analyze each one endlessly, searching for intent, for meaning, and always concluding that it was nothing, just the unconscious movements of a sleeping man. It had to be nothing. But then the plausible deniability began to fray at the edges. He started initiating the contact, not in a way that was overt or demanding, but in small, ambiguous gestures that could still be easily dismissed. He would be watching a movie on his laptop, propped up on his elbows, and he would shift so that his shoulder was pressed firmly against mine. Or he would stretch, a long, languid movement that would end with his arm draped casually behind me on the headboard. My body became a finely tuned instrument, hyper-aware of his every movement, his every breath. The locked room inside me was no longer silent. It was filled with a constant, roaring clamor of hope and fear, a deafening symphony of what-ifs. The nights became my entire world. During the day, we were still Leo and Julian, roommates and best friends. We'd talk about work, complain about the broken dishwasher, and make plans for the weekend. It was all so normal, so painfully platonic. But as the sun went down, a different reality would take hold, a silent, intimate world that existed only within the four walls of his bedroom. The transition was marked by the simple, unspoken act of his door being left open. That open door was a question, and my stepping through it was the answer. We were building a new language together, one spoken not with words, but with proximity and shared silence, and the subtle, gravitational pull of our bodies. I was drowning, and I was terrified he couldn't see it. Or worse, that he could see it and was simply pretending not to. Was I just a convenience? A warm body to ward off the loneliness that haunted him in the dark? The thought was a shard of ice in my gut. But then there were moments, small and fleeting, that suggested something more. I'd wake in the middle of the night to find him watching me, his eyes open and alert in the dim light from the window. When he saw I was awake, he would quickly close them, feigning sleep, but not before I saw something in his gaze, a flicker of confusion, of sadness, of something that looked devastatingly like my own yearning. These were the moments that fed my treacherous hope, the crumbs that kept me coming back night after night, willingly stepping into this beautiful, agonizing limbo. The ritual escalated again on a cold night in late autumn. Rain lashed against the windows, a frantic, percussive rhythm that mirrored the anxiety in my own chest. I had come down with a nasty cold, and I was exhausted, my body aching. I had planned to go to bed early, to finally spend a night in my own room. I took some medicine, drank a cup of tea, and was just about to text him that I was turning in when he appeared in my doorway. He was holding an extra pillow. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, looking uncertain. "Hey," I said, my voice thick from my congested sinuses. I was just about to crash. "I'm not feeling great." "I know," he said softly. "You look awful." He took a step into the room. I figured you'd be cold. And, I don't know. The bed's big enough. It's stupid for you to sleep on the floor." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process his words. He had never once, in all these months, acknowledged that what I was doing was a sacrifice. He had never called the armchair or the edge of the bed what it was, an uncomfortable, temporary perch. And he had certainly never suggested I sleep on the floor. It was a fiction we had both maintained. "Julian, I don't sleep on the floor," I said, confused. He had the grace to look embarrassed. He ran a hand through his already messy hair. "Right. I know. I just mean, you're always so stiff when you fall asleep sitting up. It can't be good for your back. Just take the other side of the bed. It's just sleeping. It's just sleeping." 4 simple words, a masterful piece of plausible deniability. But it felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. This was the biggest leap yet, a move from the ambiguous territory of shared space into the deeply intimate realm of a shared bed. Every alarm bell in my head was screaming. This was dangerous. This was the point of no return. But I was sick and tired, and the thought of my own cold, empty bed felt unbearable compared to the warmth I knew was waiting in his. And the truth was, I was too weak to say no. I had been worn down by months of relentless hoping. "Okay," I managed to say. The word felt enormous, a treaty signed between my cautious mind and my reckless heart. That night, for the first time, I lay down beside him. We were on our own sides, a respectable distance between us, both lying on our backs and staring up at the ceiling. The silence in the room was different now. It was heavier, charged with a new and potent tension. I could feel the warmth of his body across the small gulf of sheets that separated us. I could hear his breathing, not as a background noise, but as a distinct and intimate rhythm that seemed to sync with my own. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, my body rigid, my mind racing. I was convinced I would not sleep a wink. But the exhaustion from my cold, combined with the profound, bone-deep comfort of simply being near him, finally pulled me under. I fell asleep, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't dream. Sharing his bed became our new, unspoken ritual. The pretense of me keeping watch was gone. We were simply 2 people sharing a space, seeking comfort in the dark. The physical distance between us continued to shrink. It started with him turning onto his side to face me in his sleep. Then, a few nights later, I woke up to find I had done the same, and we were facing each other, our faces only inches apart in the pre-dawn gloom. I could feel his warm breath on my cheek. I lay there, hardly daring to breathe myself, memorizing the shape of his eyelashes, the curve of his lips, the small scar above his eyebrow from a childhood soccer injury. It was a dangerous, intoxicating proximity. He began to touch me in his sleep. At first, it was small things, a hand brushing my arm, a knee knocking against mine. I told myself it was accidental, but then it became more deliberate. One night, I woke to find his arm draped over my waist, his hand resting lightly on my hip. His body was curled around mine, my back pressed against his chest. I froze, my heart pounding a frantic, panicked rhythm. I was certain he would wake up, realize what he was doing, and pull away in a moment of horrified embarrassment. But he didn't. He just sighed softly in his sleep, his breath stirring the hair at the nape of my neck, and pulled me a fraction of an inch closer. I lay there, trapped and liberated all at once, until the sun came up. It was the most intimate physical contact I had ever shared with anyone, and it was happening under the guise of unconsciousness. It was a perfect paradox, an act of profound intimacy with built-in deniability. He could always say he was just asleep, and I could pretend to believe him. This became our dance. Night after night, we would fall asleep on our respective sides of the bed, and by morning, we would be tangled together, a knot of limbs and shared warmth. We never spoke of it. In the morning, we would carefully untangle ourselves before the full light of day could expose what we were doing. We would get up, make coffee, and talk about the weather, the carefully constructed wall of our platonic friendship slotting back into place as if the night had never happened. I was living a strange and unsustainable double life. By day, I was the reliable friend, the steady roommate. By night, I was sleeping in his arms, breathing in his scent, my body learning the shape of his by heart. The loneliness that had been my constant companion for years began to recede, replaced by a constant, low-grade hum of anxiety and hope. I felt like a photographer working with an unstable chemical solution. The image of a possible future with him was slowly, tantalizingly developing, but I knew that the slightest misstep, the wrong temperature or a sudden exposure to light, could cause the entire thing to fog over, to be lost forever. I was holding my breath, waiting for the moment when the image would either fix permanently or vanish into nothingness. The crossing happened on a night that was utterly unremarkable. There was no rainstorm, no external drama, just a quiet Wednesday. We were lying in bed, side by side in the dark, not yet asleep. We had been talking quietly, our voices low murmurs. The conversation had drifted off, leaving a comfortable silence in its wake. I was on my side, facing away from him, on the verge of sleep. I felt him shift behind me, the mattress dipping with his movement. I expected him to turn his back to me, as he sometimes did, but instead, he moved closer. I felt his hand on my shoulder, a gentle, tentative weight. He didn't say anything. He just left it there. Then, slowly, his fingers began to trace the line of my collarbone, a feather-light touch that sent a shiver down my entire spine. It was the first time he had ever touched me with such clear, conscious intent. This was not the ambiguous contact of a sleeping man. This was deliberate. My breath hitched in my throat. The air in the room grew thick, heavy with unspoken questions. His hand moved from my collarbone to my arm, his thumb stroking the sensitive skin of my inner elbow. Every point of contact felt like a brand. He moved closer still, until his chest was pressed against my back, and I could feel the steady, rhythmic beat of his heart against my shoulder blades. He rested his chin on my shoulder, his breath warm against my ear. The entire world seemed to shrink to the space of that bed, to the few inches of air between his lips and my skin. Time stretched and slowed, each second a lifetime of anticipation. I was terrified. I was ecstatic. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just waited. Leo? His voice was a whisper, a rough, fragile sound that was barely more than a breath. It was the quietest sound I had ever heard, but it echoed through my entire being. I couldn't find my own voice. I managed a small, almost imperceptible nod. He took a shaky breath. His hand on my arm tightened slightly, a small, anchoring gesture. There was a long, agonizing pause, a moment suspended between two universes. And then he asked the question that broke everything open. Would it be okay? He didn't specify what it was. He didn't have to. The question was a universe of meaning packed into 4 small words. Would it be okay if I crossed this line? Would it be okay if I kiss you? Would it be okay if I shatter the world we've built and see what we can build from the wreckage? It was an appeal for permission, an act of profound vulnerability. He was giving me the choice. He was giving me the power to say no, to retreat to the safety of our friendship. All the years of silent longing, of carefully guarded feelings, of aching for a closeness I never thought I could have, swelled up inside me. The locked room within me didn't just rattle. The door blew off its hinges. All the fear I had harbored for so long, the fear of losing him, of ruining everything, was suddenly eclipsed by a much greater fear, the fear of letting this moment pass. I turned over, slowly, deliberately, until I was facing him. In the dim light filtering through the window, I could just make out the shape of his face, the uncertainty and hope warring in his eyes. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I lifted my hand and gently cupped his jaw, my thumb stroking the rough stubble along his cheek. It was my answer. He closed his eyes, a small, shuddering breath escaping his lips. And then he leaned in and he kissed me. It was not a kiss of passion or demand. It was a question. It was tentative, soft, a gentle press of his lips against mine. It tasted of uncertainty and relief and 1,000 sleepless nights. It was a confession. I responded in kind, a mirror of his own gentleness, a quiet affirmation. We stayed like that for a moment that felt both fleeting and eternal, two cartographers charting a new and terrifyingly beautiful continent by touch. When we finally pulled apart, we just looked at each other in the darkness, the silence between us no longer tense, but filled with a fragile, shimmering awe. Something had broken, yes, but something new, something breathtaking, was beginning to form in its place. The aftermath was not the gentle dawn I had foolishly imagined. It was a silent, gray morning, heavy with a new kind of tension. I woke up alone. The other side of the bed was cold, the indentation of his body already fading from the sheets. For a moment, a sliver of panic shot through me, a chilling fear that I had dreamed the entire thing. But the phantom sensation of his lips on mine was too real, too vivid to be a product of my imagination. He was gone. I got up and walked into the living room, my heart a nervous drum against my ribs. The apartment was empty. His keys were gone. His work bag was gone. A single coffee mug, rinsed and placed carefully in the drying rack, was the only evidence he had been there at all. He didn't come home that night. A text message appeared on my phone around 7 in the evening, a sterile, impersonal string of words that felt like a slap. Hey, crashing at a buddy's place tonight. Project at work is insane. Talk soon. Talk soon. The two most meaningless words in the English language. My fragile, shimmering awe from the night before shattered into a million tiny pieces. The fear I had suppressed so successfully rushed back in, a tidal wave of cold, black water. I had misread everything. The kiss had been a mistake, an anomaly born of loneliness and confusion that he was now deeply regretting. I had let myself hope, and this was my punishment. The silence in the apartment was deafening, a mocking echo of the intimate silences we had shared in his room. I retreated to my own bed, a space that now felt foreign and impossibly cold, and I felt the full, crushing weight of my own foolishness. He avoided me for 3 days. 3 days of stilted texts, of missed calls that went straight to voicemail, of an empty apartment that felt more like a tomb than a home. He was a ghost, a presence defined only by his absence. With each passing hour, my hurt hardened into a cold, sharp-edged anger. Anger at him for his cowardice, for being unable to face what had happened between us. But mostly, I was angry with myself. I had broken my own cardinal rule. I had risked the friendship. I had allowed the observer to step into the frame, and in doing so, I had ruined the composition. The beautiful, aching expanse I had glimpsed was just a mirage, and I was now lost in a barren desert of my own making. On the 4th day, I came home from work to find him in the kitchen. He was standing at the counter, his back to me, methodically making a sandwich as if it were the most important task in the world. He looked exhausted. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his shoulders were slumped with a weariness that seemed to go beyond a simple lack of sleep. He didn't seem to hear me come in. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, the anger and the hurt and the love all churning inside me into a toxic, volatile mixture. The quiet observer was gone. I couldn't stand the silence anymore. It was a poison, and it was killing me. Julian. My voice was sharper than I intended, a crack of sound in the quiet room. He flinched, his shoulders tensing. He turned around slowly, a half-made sandwich in his hands, a guarded, miserable expression on his face. He looked like a cornered animal. "Hey," he said, his voice flat. "I was just grabbing a bite." "Don't," I said, my voice shaking with a fury I didn't know I possessed. "Don't you dare stand there and pretend like nothing happened. Don't you dare try to talk to me about sandwiches." He flinched again, putting the sandwich down on the counter. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared at a point on the floor somewhere to my left. "Leo, I'm sorry. I've been slammed." "Stop lying," I said, and the words came out with more force than I expected. "Just, for once, stop hiding behind excuses and just be honest with me. What was that? What was Wednesday night? Was it a mistake? Was it a joke? Was I just some convenient warm body for you to use until you felt better? Because if that's what it was, you need to tell me. You owe me that much." My chest was heaving, the words tumbling out of me in a torrent, all the questions and fears I had been swallowing for months finally breaking free. I needed to know the truth, even if it was the version that would shatter me completely. The ambiguity was so much worse. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were filled with a kind of panicked despair that stole the air from my lungs. "No," he whispered, his voice cracking. "God, no, Leo. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a joke. Then what was it?" I demanded, my voice breaking. "Why did you run? Why are you hiding from me? After everything. I thought we were better than that. I thought you were better than that." He closed his eyes, and a single tear traced a path down his cheek. He wiped it away angrily with the back of his hand. "Because I'm a coward," he said, the words raw and self-lacerating. "Because I am so terrified I can't breathe." "Terrified of what?" I asked, my anger beginning to dissolve, replaced by a painful confusion. "Of me?" "No," he said, shaking his head vehemently. "Not of you. Of this. Of what I feel. Leo, I have spent my entire life on a track. You know that. High school, college, this job, Sarah, it was all part of a plan. A straight line. And it was safe. It made sense. And then she left, and the whole thing fell apart. And I was lost. And you were there. You were just there. And it was quiet, and it was calm, and for the first time in a long time, I felt safe." He took a shaky breath, finally meeting my gaze head-on. His eyes were pleading, desperate for me to understand. "Lying in bed with you at night, it started as just not wanting to be alone. But then it wasn't. It was, I just wanted to be near you. I'd lie there, awake, and I'd just listen to you breathe. And nothing else mattered. All the noise in my head, all the pressure from my dad, all the anxiety about the future, it just went quiet. And then that night, I kissed you, and it was like coming home to a place I had never been before. It felt more real than anything I have ever felt in my entire life." He stopped, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of pure frustration. "And that's what terrifies me," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Because I don't know what it means. I'm not supposed to feel this way. Not for a guy. Not for my best friend. And I looked at you the next morning, sleeping, and you looked so peaceful, and all I could think was that I was going to ruin you. That I was going to pull you into my own mess and my own confusion, and I was going to hurt you. So I ran. It was the only thing I could think of to do. To protect you from me." His confession hung in the air between us, a raw and painful and breathtakingly honest thing. All the anger drained out of me, replaced by a wave of profound, aching empathy. He hadn't run because he didn't feel anything. He had run because he felt everything. He was just as lost and terrified as I was. He had built his own locked room, not for years like I had, but in a frantic, panicked few days, and he was suffocating inside it. I closed the distance between us, my feet moving before my brain had fully processed the decision. I stopped in front of him, so close I could see the faint tremor in his hands. I reached out, not to touch his face or to pull him into an embrace, but to simply take his hand. His fingers were cold, but they curled around mine instantly, his grip tight, desperate. "You idiot," I said, and the words were so soft, so full of a tenderness that surprised even me. "You absolute, beautiful idiot. You think you're protecting me by disappearing? The only thing that hurts me is you not being here. The only thing that hurts is the silence." I looked into his eyes, trying to pour all the certainty I didn't feel into my gaze. "I don't know what this is either, Julian. I have no map for this. But being terrified is not a good enough reason not to find out. Not for me. And I don't think it is for you. Either." I squeezed his hand. "You don't have to have it all figured out. You have to stop running. You just have to stay." Stay? The word echoed in the quiet kitchen, a bookend to the plea that had started this whole unraveling. He had asked me to stay, to ward off his loneliness. Now I was asking him to stay, to face our shared fear. He stared at me, his eyes searching my face, and for the first time in days, I saw the confusion in his expression begin to clear, replaced by a fragile, dawning resolution. He let out a long, shuddering breath, a sound of surrender. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay, I'll stay." That conversation was not a magic fix. It was not the end of the fear or the confusion, but it was the beginning of the honesty. It was the moment we both agreed to stop pretending. We talked for hours that night, sitting at the kitchen table until the sun came up, the half-made sandwich forgotten on the counter. We talked about our friendship, about the years of unspoken things, about the terrifying, exhilarating possibility of what we could become. He told me about the pressure he'd felt his whole life to be a certain kind of man. I told him about the room I had built inside myself, the one where I had kept my love for him under lock and key for so long. It was a careful, painstaking process, like disarming a bomb, wire by wire. We agreed to take it slow, to give him the space to navigate the seismic shift in his own identity. But the most important change had already happened. The ambiguity was gone. The nights were no longer a landscape of plausible deniability. When I went to his room that night, it was not because of an unspoken plea. It was a conscious choice made by both of us. When he reached for me in the dark, it was not the phantom touch of a man pretending to be asleep. His hand found mine, his fingers lacing through my own, a deliberate and grounding pressure. He pulled me close, and for the first time, I didn't hold my breath. I didn't lie there, rigid and analyzing. I relaxed into his hold, my head finding the natural curve of his shoulder, and I let myself feel the simple, profound peace of being exactly where I was supposed to be. The weeks that followed were a process of quiet discovery. We were learning a new grammar, a new way of being with each other. The domestic rhythms of our life as roommates began to blend with the new, tender intimacy of whatever it was we were becoming. It was in the small things. The way he would now reach out and touch the small of my back as he passed behind me in the kitchen. The way I started leaving my camera on the living room table, no longer afraid of him seeing the longing in the photos I took. We were slowly, carefully, dismantling the walls we had built, both separately and together. One Saturday morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee. I was in his bed, tangled in his arms, the early morning light filtering soft and golden through the blinds. It was a scene that had played out 100 times, but this morning felt different. There was no pretense of disentangling ourselves, no rush to re-establish the boundaries of the daytime. I opened my eyes to find him already awake, watching me with a soft, unguarded expression. He smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes, the first one I had seen in what felt like a lifetime. "Morning," he whispered, his voice still rough with sleep. "Morning," I whispered back. He leaned in and kissed me, a slow, lazy morning kiss that was as comfortable and natural as breathing. It was no longer a question. It was a statement. This is us now. We began to build a new life in the wreckage of our old one. It was a quiet, unassuming structure, built on a foundation of honesty and 1,000 shared glances. There were no grand pronouncements, no need to label what we were to the outside world just yet. It was enough that we knew. Our world existed within the walls of our apartment, in the comfortable silence of a shared meal, in the steady rhythm of our breathing in the dark. The door to his bedroom was no longer left ajar as an invitation. It was simply closed, because I was already on the other side of it. The fortress had lowered its drawbridge, and I had walked inside to find not a fortress at all, but a home. I still think about that first night, my hand on the doorknob, my entire being balanced on the knife's edge of a single choice. It's easy to think of life as a series of big, momentous decisions, but the truth is, it's often the small, quiet moments that define us. The choice to let go of a doorknob, the choice to turn around, the choice to say yes to a whispered, forward question in the dark. We spend so much of our lives building walls to protect ourselves from being hurt, carefully curating the images we present to the world. But we forget that the most beautiful things, the most profound connections, can only be developed in the darkroom of vulnerability. It is only when we are brave enough to expose our true selves to the light, with all our fear and all our longing, that we can create something real, something that lasts. We began to heal in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned to create together. And in that quiet, we finally found our focus.